what happens in Fire Emblem gameplay-wise and lore-wise is not exactly one and the same. I mean, these battles that are depicted as a group of like 10 heroes versus maybe 30 opponents are actually supposed to be massive skill battles most of the time. That's the best example. But it can also be seen when looking at the abilities of the playable characters. Some who are absolute monsters gameplay-wise are really not that remarkable in-universe, and the reverse is also true as well. So I was wondering, who are canonically, so in-universe and based on the lore, the strongest playable characters in every game, completely disregarding gameplay quality. And we start with the characters from Archania, who are of course largely the same names between Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem, but the few shifts that do exist actually seriously alter the results. Let's start with Shadow Dragon, where we immediately come to a very important question for all the games in this video. How much do we value the power of unique weapons? After all, as a soldier and human, Marv isn't really anything too special. He's a good fighter, a noble man, but it's not like he's some superhuman like plenty of other characters in the series, including in his own game. But when you then factor in Falchion, his stature suddenly shoots up. As a descendant of Anri, he is the only one who can use Falchion, a sword that is pretty much humanity's sole hope in the fight against the dragons. Remove Falchion from the story and Archania is doomed, but Marv is then also just a regular prince. Personally, I feel like separating a character from their unique weapon isn't really fair. Being able to use it is part of their lore of who they are. But when it comes to Falchion specifically and its role in saving Archania, I think I need to disregard that a little. After all, it's not like Falchion is this godly, all-destroying weapon. It's specifically designed to be used against Medeus and his dragons. Against anyone else, Marv is back to being that good but not even amazing warrior. To put it simply, while I do keep weapons in consideration when judging characters, I also think we have to keep in mind how situationally powerful that weapon is, and Falchion is rather situational. And so, Marv isn't my Archania winner. It has two other names. One of which is only playable with Shadow Dragon, the other only a Mystery of the Emblem. First up, it's Godo, the legendary White Sage who was once a part of Naga's clan and, should he ever find his Dragonstone again, be a being with godlike abilities. While his human form is not exactly that strong, Wendell mentions he is still revered as a deity. He clearly has a great amount of wisdom and knowledge, and as Heroes puts it, he has magical abilities beyond human comprehension, which suggests to me the already impressive impact he makes throughout the story is only a blip of what he's capable of. He is, however, no longer playable in Mystery of the Emblem, and therefore we need a new name, and that name is gonna be Sirius, aka Camus. He was already considered one of the greatest generals in Archania during the first game, and since then his list of achievements has only grown with his adventures in Valentia and then his return. It is even said in New Mystery that Camus is the first since Anri, the legendary hero wielding Falchion, to give Medeus any trouble in battle, which speaks volumes to how strong this guy is. Being able to go toe-to-toe with the Shadow Dragon himself, without a weapon specifically designed for that, is a feat that needs to be respected. Now, he does obviously use Gratifus, which is a Regalia weapon in Archania, but it's never actually stated that these weapons are inflicted with some divine power or something. They're simply very strong and they were used during the founding of Archania itself, but they're not like Falchion, where they make defeating Medeus any easier. So it only further shows how strong Sirius, aka Camus, aka Zeke is. And as such, it also stands to reason he's a lead candidate for the win in the next game we're tackling, Gaiden or Shadows of Valentia. Zeke as a separate character based on this game alone isn't really up there. Someone like Mycen has a much better resume. It's only if you consider who this guy really is that it feels like he has to be top 2 at least. Especially when you consider that canonically, the cast of Valentia isn't actually that strong, all things considered. There are no Manichees here. Noma may be influential, but he's absolutely no Goto. Celica is clearly something special, but her abilities don't appear to be too crazy, and Mycen in his peak has a chance against Camus, but he is not at that level anymore, of course. So really, the only other candidate is Ulm, especially when you consider he has been trained by Mycen, which makes him strong enough to basically instantly impress everyone in the Deliverance that isn't named Fernand. And that is at the start of the game. From there, he still learns a lot and gains access to Falchion, which is, again, not some super weapon or anything, but of course it helps. That said, in the end, I think if peak Ulm and peak Zeke, which never was even remotely close to happening in Valentia, Zeke had only just returned from serious injuries, were to happen, then I would back Zeke personally. back-to-back winner, that's not something you should expect much more often. Time for a new cast as we look at Genealogy of the Holy War. While Shadows of Valentia had a pretty weak group, all things considered, Jagdral, due to its focus on Holy Blood, has an abundance of incredibly strong playable units, most of them with legendary weapons that are not as situational as Valshan is. Like Turfing, the weapon of choice for Sigurd and Seliph, which is, I would say, a lot stronger than Valshan lore-wise. It has the ability to mostly protect the user from magic attacks entirely, which is actually a tremendous boon for specifically this discussion because many of the other holy weapons in Jagdral are tomes. Then again, the strongest holy weapon is considered in lore to be the Book of Naga, and it is the only weapon out of the set to be absolutely required to defeat Loptus. It can only be wielded by Julia, since she is the only person to have the necessary bloodline. Now, you can however draw a comparison here to Valshan, since the Book of Naga too is mostly meant as a way to defeat this great evil rather than everyday opponents, thus making it situational. It is definitely more powerful than Valshan is outside of its intended purpose though, I'll give it that, but when you remove the weapon, Marv is still a good fighter, while Julia's powers are much harder to really discern and her abilities are generally more support focused. So, keeping that in mind, I'm gonna call it for Seliph. Because although it is impressive Sigurd goes on his path without Turving for a good chunk of it, Seliph benefits from also having a mother with holy blood, meaning that he should potentially be even stronger than his father, as well as, well, he actually finishes his mission and defeats the great evil. Sigurd, well, you know. We take another step back to a generally weaker cast again, despite it being set in Jagdral still, when we look at Thracia 776. I think this is a group you can approach from two angles. On one hand, you have the actual in-game lore, what the story dictates basically, but on the other hand, you have the possible in-game interpretation of gameplay mechanics. What I mean by that is the fact that in Genealogy of the Holy War, Leif can become a Master Knight, which allows him to master basically every weapon in the game at once. That is ridiculous. If you take that at face value, it would instantly make him one of the greatest warriors Fire Emblem has ever seen. All on top of the impressive but not legendary stuff he pulls in his own game. However, like I said, that is interpretation of a gameplay mechanic. It is never said in lore or in the story that Leif is really this master of all weapons. The closest we get to acknowledgement of it is in Engage, but even here it's mostly gameplay mechanics. His bond conversations are not about it whatsoever, probably due to the fact he can't become a Master Knight in Thracia itself, only in Genealogy. And so, I think it is only right we give the title to Sed, the only character in Thracia who has access to a holy weapon, being Forseti, which is even one of the strongest. That alone is honestly enough to put him straight in the top spot. Impressive as Leif's ability to wield pretty much everything is, Sed can channel the power of a god and he is the only one who can. He has to win here. We enter Alib next, to start with the Binding Blade of course. And this is gonna be a bit of a funny one. Because according to the rules we have set up, there cannot be any other winner besides Roy. He who starts the game as an inexperienced child, who is meant to be seen as so weak that it is reflected in the gameplay, and yet he has to win this. And that has everything to do with the fact that the Binding Blade, the weapon, is insanely strong. It is one of the strongest weapons lore-wise that Fire Emblem has ever seen. It is widely acknowledged throughout the game that the Binding Blade, despite being a legendary weapon just like Durandal, Armats, Muligir and the rest, is far stronger than the rest of the group, which are already legendary weapons, it's kinda in the name. Furthermore, it can channel the power of fire without any magic input from the user, it can heal its wielder, it can pass on memories from past users, and it even seems to be magically in touch with the emotions and thoughts of the wielder, seen during the fight with Adun, where it simply defeats her without killing her. That just puts it into a league of its own. And most impressive of all, it makes Roy a good unit. So yeah, he wins with a hefty lead, even if he's being carried like crazy by his personal weapon. In the Blazing Blade though, all the gaps are much smaller. The normal legendary weapons of Alib are good, but they are numerous, and even the lords of this game are canonically not really that strong. And just like we saw in Shadow Dragon, what happens then is that the old man with the powers that are possibly too strong to comprehend runs away with the win. Aphos isn't at Goto's level, let that be clear, but he is a member of the original 8 legends, and again a valuable aid of Eliwood's army when they face Nergal. He also has a legendary weapon, he is the wielder of 4 Blaze, so that is not something others can use to catch up on him. Sure, he dies at the end of the game, and we semi-punished Sigurd for that earlier, but by then the game is over. He has been playable, and if you remember that he was still that strong on the last day of his life, imagine how strong Aphos was at his peak. That's a level even Big Hector can't reach. Moving on to the Sacred Stones, which across the board is probably the weakest army from a lore perspective we have ever had. The only playable character in this entire game with anything ridiculously impressive is Myr. As in, she is a dragon, that's automatically good, even if Myr is hardly a divine dragon. Ephraim is mentioned throughout the game to be a formidable fighter, great tactician and a very suitable next king, but due to a complete lack of a legendary or holy weapon, he fails to create a gap between himself and the other powerhouses in the army. And so, I gotta say, I find it hard to overlook Seth. And is that perhaps a bit inspired by his gameplay fortitude? Maybe a little, yeah. But don't forget that Seth is canonically a rock all throughout the siblings' journey, all while carrying an injury, and that is part of the story, not gameplay. In any other game, Seth wouldn't have won, but with the lack of a true standout, I'm gonna give it to him in Macvel. On to Tellius, which is of course another continent with two games that have very similar casts, but they're not identical, and unlike Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem, their status quo is also a bit different depending on the game. For example, Radiant Dawn has to be Ike's, absolutely no question. Ragnaw is a monster of a weapon, another one up there is one of the strongest in Fire Emblem history, but even beyond that, Ike is pretty much universally considered to be a powerhouse unlike any other on his own. He is no Roy, Ragnaw is simply adding on to his power, it isn't carrying him. As seen in Heroes and Engage, IS considers Ike to be the strongest lord we have ever had, and as you can tell from the other picks in this video, that is a title that's worth a lot. And especially in Radiant Dawn, where Ike is presented as this absolute legend of the continent, I think it holds water. But in Path of Radiance, I think you can make a different argument. This Ike is still growing, still learning. He does already have Ragnaw, of course, and this is where he earns the legendary status he has in Radiant Dawn, but purely within the confines of this game, I think you can make the argument that the Laguz Royals should also be up there. All of them are already beyond humans in terms of capabilities, and these are also considered the finest warriors of their respective tribes. That's nothing to scoff at. But of course, if you take everything into consideration and don't separate the games, which we probably shouldn't since we didn't do that for Camus either, then yeah, it's Ike, 100%. Awakening is up next, and I gotta say, this is probably the hardest if you ask me. You've got a bunch of candidates that are certainly really strong, but they're not at that absolute legendary tier that makes picking a winner easy. Robin obviously has powers that are beyond the normal human, but as a fighter they may be very strong in game, but the lore doesn't really build them up as this unstoppable powerhouse. If anything, they're a more adept tactician than a fighter. And then there is the fact that while Robin can tap into the power of Grima, they seemingly don't have much control over it, to the point they are unable to stop Grima from completely possessing them. Sure, that Robin is a master of tactics is basically a fact, but that doesn't make them the strongest character. Within the confines of the Shepherds and the base army, I think the answer is probably Chrom, right? He is their leader, he's a formidable fighter, and he pulls off some crazy stunts in some supports, even if he lacks intrinsic powers and is another user of Falchion, which I have talked about enough for now, I think. In that light though, I feel like Lucina should also not be underestimated. Is she as strong as her father? Maybe not quite, even if their actual battle ended in a tie, it does feel as if Chrom is a bit further in his development. But we shouldn't disregard the fact that Lucina found a way out of a Grima-controlled hellhole all by herself while in the absolute thick of it. She was the Chrom of the children's group, and they were arguably in a much more difficult situation than the Shepherds, and yet managed to find their way. That's impressive for sure. But when looking at sheer power and abilities, I think the real answer is probably Tiki. While she was one of the weaker Divine Dragons in the Archania games due to her age, she is now fully matured and has taken on an important role in representing the power of Naga, who was already established earlier to be one of the most powerful beings in Fire Emblem period. Tiki is not that strong, and I think that even this version of her is still no Godo, for example, but considering that the rest of Awakening's cast lacks any legendary powers to speak of, Tiki is probably ahead. And I keep saying probably and think because it is a little unclear how strong Tiki actually is here. It's not like she's very story important after all, she can literally be missed. But you don't become the voice of Naga by just being a dragon. There has to be some incomprehensible power to her that is beyond what Chrom and Lucina have, and she at least has control over, unlike Robin. Fates is a lot easier. Within the lore, it is clearly put forward that Ryoma and Xander are the absolute best of what their respective nations have to offer, bar none. None of the royal siblings are at their level, let alone one of the many retainers. They are far clear. While Azura has special powers that go beyond the mere mortal abilities, hers are even more situational of Falchion, and in battle they don't help much, so she is out. But of course, the absolute best has to be Corrin in Revelation. Raijinto is phenomenal, as is Siegfried, but the Omega Yato is another weapon that is up there as one of the strongest in series history. It is literally the Fire Emblem, and then we haven't even talked about Corrin themselves. While their human form is never really said to be something absolutely outstanding, their feral dragon form is just as threatening as the sword is, giving them pretty much two separate attempts to become the strongest character and then combine them into one. Now, it is said in several supports that in terms of human combat ability, Corrin doesn't weigh up to Xander, and presumably Ryoma neither. I mean, the game literally opens with Xander training Corrin. That says enough about how they compare. But like I just explained, Corrin is much more than that. If you compare them to most Manaketes, take Tiki for example, they are far ahead. Their dragon form is just as strong, but their human form is way stronger than Tiki's, Myr's, etc. They have the blood of a Nankos to further strengthen them, and then also still the Omega Yato on top of that. It's just a level that even Xander and Ryoma cannot reach. Next is Three Houses of course, which may be a lore-rich continent, but it is a bit of a weird one in terms of power scaling. The deity figures of this land, so Rhea and the actually qualifying Sedef and Flame, are kinda underwhelming for the status they have. They don't really appear to be anything too strong. They're rather just different from mortal humans. They're barely any stronger per se. And then you have names like Dimitri and Edelgard, who are supposed to be regular humans, but due to the power of their crests, they are arguably among the strongest humans the series has ever seen. But I won't delay the inevitable any longer. We all know who the strongest character is here, and it is of course Byleth. They have the literal progenitor goddess of Folkland living inside them, and later essentially fuse with them to become a borderline demigod themselves. And don't overlook the simple but extremely powerful ability to turn back time on a whim using Divine Pulse, which Byleth can intrinsically control, unlike Alm, Celica and Alear, who all need an item to do it. I haven't considered Mila's Turnwheel prior and won't consider the Draconic Time Crystal soon either, for the simple reason that this feels more like a gameplay mechanic to me than a lore or story one. Sure, the items do exist in the story of course, but they're not used in cutscenes or at important moments whatsoever, unlike Divine Pulse, which Byleth uses in several cutscenes. So while I did consider it part of Alm, Celica and Alear's kits, I do think it is part of Byleth's. Then again, they would have probably won without it anyway. And finally we have Engage, which is unfortunately a rather boring one to end on, because there is not really a serious competitor coming close to the status of Alear. Rafal is probably closest due to him becoming a great Fell Dragon in the DLC, a threat that's on paper equal to Sombron, but endgame Alear is up there as one of the most powerful characters we have ever seen. They're a Divine Dragon, they're also a Fell Dragon, and they are an emblem, which means they're effectively immortal and unstoppable. Like, literally, the only way to stop them pretty much is to do what Sombron did in the bad ending and control them like a Dark Emblem. But even then, they're not dead. They could be freed and return to power once more. Alear is certainly a character in the realm of, it's hard to really pin down what they're capable of, because they don't really seem to know it themselves. Well, Engage isn't really too big on lore, but I don't know, I would say it is evident that Alear is the most powerful playable unit in the game. Not in the last place, because there is barely any competition, at least until the DLC came out. And that has been all of them. Do you agree with my picks, or did I underestimate someone? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. And if you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.